OS does exist as an operational system and will never go off the table. We have to look for threats and monitor the host, and there is kind of gap in terms of information. Linux and Windows have been covered a lot, and you can find a lot of information about that, and you can see what actually should be monitored and what data should be collected. But macOS is overlooked by the detection experts and those who develop the correlation rules. In our presentation, we'll try to somehow fill that gap. As I said, we're working for Bison. This is what we are doing. Maxim used to work for SOC, and actually I'm doing a lot of other things. So this is what I'm going to put an accent on. Certainly, there are lots of things that we will fail to cover in the framework of the presentation. We wanted to speak about initial access, execution, persistence, credential access, and discovery within the presentation. But when we started doing the presentation, we came up with 180 slides, which is not enough for 45 minutes. So we reduced that by half, so it would be part one, and the second part would be delivered at another conference, some other event. But today we're going to speak about what has been highlighted with red.
Our sources of information. Well, we have some information vacuum here, and unfortunately there are some companies, there are some vendors who regularly say something on the topic. So you can see them here. In May, we read about 200 reports from ESET and other guys, and we picked the typical ways the malware or threat actors operate. Apart from this, vendors, we have read also these two beautiful books, and all the ideas which became hypotheses for the text. So they were checked using our telemetry, about 5,000 Mac hosts from various infrastructures and industries. Okay, what are the mechanisms in the OS to get telemetry? Okay, we have the core modules, which is quite outdated. We have a new framework called Endpoint Protection Framework. So this is the Apple security framework, which was presented by Apple in Catalina, and it provides the low-level data on what's going on in the system. Talking about the network, this is network extensions. So if you need to parse the traffic, the network events, so we can do this through network extensions. And they also have periodic polling systems when they take snapshots of data, like the snapshot of active users, and this information can be gathered every 10 minutes, for instance, or any other time interval. In terms of the tools, so the previous one was about the sources, this one is about the tools. So here you can see the most popular free and openly available tools. Talking about openly available non-commercial EDRs, so the favorite one is O Square today. So I think this is the best free option for Mac OS. And Apple is continuously improving their operating system, and in Ventura, which is the latest release, 13, they have the ES Logger, which is a native Apple client endpoint security framework. There you can sign for any event, any JSON, you can send it into a file or a syslog or whatever. So in the past they didn't have it, but starting with Ventura they have this ES Logger, which works pretty nicely. Red Canary. So if you have been following the news and the Western companies, well, Red Canary recently launched the Mac Monitor. It is not an agent for continuous monitoring, but it's very good as an investigation tool. If you want to have a look at the system, so you have it, it's not connected to any centralized monitoring, and you want to run experiments there, you want to see the telemetry available from an OS, you can launch the Mac Monitor, and the beautiful graphical interface will show you everything going on in the system. Now let's talk about techniques and approaches. So we'll start with initial access. Maxim, the floor is yours. Hello, colleagues. So let's talk about the way malware or viruses can make it to a Mac. So we have some for macOS, as it turns out. Okay, how can an attacker gain access to a macOS machine? Well, more often than not, they do it through phishing and by frauding some software which looks like hack legitimate. So they download malware or they use social engineering against them, and the user finally installed some bad package. Okay, what do we have here? The application bundles and packages and images of disks, Microsoft Office images, macros for MS Office, and compromise through various browser vulnerabilities. Okay, let's look at them in more detail. Okay, in macOS systems we have a feature. So the app we click and the one we see in the Finder and web interface. So they are not exe files. These are folders which have some data structure. An example can be seen here with this website. Here's the key element stored in contents, macOS and some executive file. So this is the proper binary which performs this package. So if we further look at macOS and Windows as a comparison, so the closest element in Windows would be the folder of the app following C program files. Okay, what can a threat act do? One of the popular phishing techniques for macOS is converting the application bundles into a file which looks like a document. Okay, what can the document look like in this case for a threat actor? So we launch an app which downloads the PDF or any other document, and apart from that, they download the malware code which gives access to the machine. What does it look like? The user downloads from a share or from a messenger, downloads a document, clicks the document, something happens, and then they open the document. So it looks interesting for the user. So what happens inside? So here you can see compiled also scripts. So we'll talk about them later. So we have the applet. This is the executive file which launches the compiled OS script, and then it downloads the legitimate document and it downloads the payload, and after launches it, the user has no suspicions. Okay, how can we try to look for events like that in our infrastructure? As the previous slide showed, it will be a double extension file, so we can try to find double extensions in like an application and a document extension. As I mentioned, the application bundle is not the executive file. This is a folder with the files. So it will be shown not as the name of the executive file, but rather it will be in the file pathway. And the right picture shows the parent process. So you can see the applet is in a catalog, which is in this regular way. Okay, let's follow our discussion. Packages. So packages are types of files which are used to distribute software to the end users. The two popular formats are packages and DMD files. Okay, what is a package? Okay, this is an application bundle which is archived into a SAR archive, and the bundles also have some functions for installing the app on the user's machine. So if you compare it with Windows, okay, packages in macOS look like MCR files for Windows. So they have some functions to unpack, to install, and to launch something. If you try to download some unsigned package, we'll have this. So if we click on this, so we'll see the picture to the right where you have OK. But if we click with the right button and then say OK, then the window will be different, so you can launch it. So the attacker can instruct the user to open the packages and to give them connection and launch rights, even though they don't have a signature. There are two installers here in macOS. One is used with a graphic interface, and the other one is used when installing bundles from the command line. And we can consider this when we do the detection logic. What can you use in the packages to launch payload? The first element to consider is the post and pre-install scripts. So in the bundle you can have a script which will be launched before or after installation. So this is really convenient when you need to prepare the machine or you need to remove some temp files from the system. Okay, how the attacker can use it? So you have in the file package info, you have information saying that there is a pre-install script in the package. So when you click the bundle, the installation process starts and the script is launched. Okay, how can we hunt this? The launch of the packages. There is a specialized process, and the activity of this process says that there is some package being installed. If in the command line you have some pre-install or post-install elements, we can understand that this process launched a pre- or post-install script. And apart from that, we don't want all the installations in the system throughout the infrastructure, but rather the scripts which cause some potentially dangerous processes. And they are shown here. So here you can see shells and interpreters and system utilities which can be dangerous. The next slide. Okay, another hunt. We can consider a launch of some daughter processes from the scripts. So the hunt is shown here. The important thing to identify is that scripts like that will be launched from temporary catalog, and using the parent command line search, we can see where it is launched from, and we can see that the child is launched from the pre-install script. And this can be quite interesting in hunting for undesirable commands. The really important thing shown here is that if the threat actor launches the payload in background through epicenter or through the no hub utility, then the utility launched from the pre or post install script, the parent process will be launched D. So it will look like launched by a system daemon, and a hunt like that is not going to work, and this holds true for all scripts. The next slide, please. Okay, the next thing. A similar hunt can detect the launch of potentially dangerous utilities from temporary catalogs responsible for pre- and post-install installation. So when a package launches a file, we can see using the directory where the parent was launched. The next element is distribution XML. This is an element of the function of the package to require some system, to check some system requirements. So whether there is any software, the version, then you can say that this software is good for installation on this system. What can be the distribution XMLs? A script which will launch, launched inside the XML. It will be embedded script, or it can be a standalone file, which can be also a part of the bundle. In this case, it will be an external script. When we start launching this package, we have another pop-up window. If we try to hunt this, we'll see the query, different queries for embedded and external scripts because their logic is different. So this is quite straightforward. So if the parent process is the installer, it means that the command is executed from distribution XML. So this will be a dedicated process. Talking about an external script, there the launch string is different. We need to have a look at the parent process. There is another intermediary process in the chain here. Another element which is also used by the threat agents install plugins. They are installed into the bundle and also launched at the installation stage. They can also check various dependencies and do some other checks. Okay, how to see that an installer plugin is launched? Well, to launch these micro programs, they have a special service, special exe file. So when you identify it in the pathway to the parent process, you can understand that some sibling process or some other process will launch like that. The next thing is DMG. This is primarily related to the ISO files in Windows, so these are images having the files. Usually software is distributed like that. Apart from that, they use this to distribute not only legitimate software, but also supply chain attacks, so 3.6 for instance. And the lower one is launch of the agent, if you distribute the payload through DMG. Okay, how can we find launches from the DMG modules? I don't think there will be many differences compared to the native application. The only thing we can do is the hunt to find the portable mode launched apps from the image without transferring to the system. The next one, MS Office, macOS. They also work in macOS. You can have VBA and XLM macOS, and here you can see how we can defect the run. This is quite straightforward. So if we see the process, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or any other software, so we can be sure that this is a macros because we don't have many processes on macOS from MS Word. So usually macros are launched in Sandbox, but there is a way around it. You can add a pattern to the file name, and this way we'll have the files not only inside the sandbox but also outside of it. And when making files in the user profile, we can somehow execute our payload. Okay, we need to generate a file with a name mask. We can detect this name mask of files. And if we see that this file is created by a process with the current directory in the sandbox of Word, Excel or PowerPoint, we can say that now they're trying to leave the sandbox. The next slide. This hunt will detect a launch of commands from Safari, Chrome or Firefox. So we can see this stuff if they try to exploit vulnerabilities in the browsers. This is not very precise. Okay, the next slide is execution. So this is a mind map. The OSA script. This is like PowerShell for macOS. Launch methods are shown here. We can also launch one-liners and scripts in memory. From scripts, we can launch various methods like native API and get almost endless functions. And we can also remotely launch scripts on other Macs. So this is Apple supported. There are JavaScript and Apple scripts, and they can be compiled in apps, just like with the document shown before. So when they compile scripts, then we have an app, and an app can be decompiled, or it can be launch only. Here you can compare the two files. The run only app can be opened in a script editor. Okay, the activity of the threat actor, the launch of the script, with mentioning the file, so maybe it doesn't happen as often as it seems. Then running some commandlets responsible for interesting things, like obtain information on the system or obtain information from the script board. And the final thing to mention is that these scripts can be compiled, and compilation doesn't happen often, and this is also quite suspicious. So few legitimate users would use also or Apple scripts to manage Macs. Usually it's done by some other ways. That's why the use of also scripts is a negative pattern, more likely than something usual. We can also use Objective-C tools. Then execution. Well, we have identified at least 7 different shells, BAS, PHH, and many others. So let's see what we can see. We can detect the reverse shells using pipes, DCTP, def UDP. So you can use this search for finding these shells. Apart from that, we can detect base64 encoding. It's also used for Macs, and it's used for using payload. So you can use Python utilities, and you can use OpenSSL tools for this. Another utility which is suspicious is no hub. So this is what the utilities do to launch this in background. So the use of this tool is quite suspicious. Binary files execution. The binary files in macOS, so they are called mature. So we need to have a look at the temporary directories, and you can see them here, and there are some links to them. There are 4 directories for this. And the final important thing to mention, we can also detect the change of access rights or flags in the temporary directories. You can use for the smoked room, and this way you identify the operations shown here. This can be a specific malware pattern. Okay, interpreters for macOS, they have Ruby, Perl, and Python. This gives us a lot of opportunity for exploitation. So here you can see how the shells are run. This is the launch of some suspicious interpreter-generated processes. And here you can see another slide. There are also script and curl in one command line is a dangerous thing. The same is when a curl is downloading a file to a temporary directory. This is almost 100% of some malware. And now persistence. A few words about persistence and credentials access. So we start with persistence. Any attacker, any malware tries to have persistent presence in the system to survive reset. In macOS, there are several dozen persistence ways. Many examples, maybe less than 100, and practice shows there are 3 most popular ways. Well, say 95 to 98% of all the cases are shown here. The launch agents, launch daemons, and also use login items. We'll talk about them. So those who are interested in some exotic persist ways, so please follow the link here. In this project, the guys aggregate a lot of original ways of making an entry to the auto load in macOS. A few words about the monitoring tools provided by the operating system. Ventura, the latest one, there Apple have reached the auto load, and there are two great things here. Number one, in system settings, you can see all the launch agents and daemons and items. In the past, to find this, you had to go through some catalogs or look lists of daemons or agents to understand what is part of auto launch in the system. And the third new thing is notifying the user that new login item or daemon or agent is coming. So if something comes to your auto loading, the system will notify you the right corner. Okay, let's talk about some utilities. Those who are interested in the macOS security must have heard the knock knock utility. This is like auto runs, but for macOS. So you can scan all the well-known areas where malware can, or legitimate software can find its way into the auto run, and you also have block. Knock knock is a scanner, but block is a preventive mechanism. When something is being installed, you will hear a window saying that a process wants to install a new launch agent or daemon, allow or reject. So this is a straightforward protection system. Some techniques, launch agents and launch daemons. So in Windows, there are services. So the launch daemons are the system services, the ones which are launched on behalf of the system. When you load the macOS computer, and launch agent, they are about the user processes. Those launched when the user is identified. So how are they present, these launch daemons and agents of the system? They are present through the list files, which are put in some catalogs. You can see here. So the system lists, the system daemons and the agents catalogs are protected in Mac by the so-called SIP mechanism. So even the root cannot record anything like that there. So malware can hardly make it to the system's catalogs with the lists. More often than not, they use launch agents from the user, where you can get to the autoload without having the root rights in the system. There are list files. So lists are everywhere in Mac. The OS likes lists, and comparing this to Windows, this is like a registry. But the registry has a limited number of things, but lists are many in Mac. They're used to manage auto run, for settings, storage, for statistics generation, and so on. So lists are everywhere, and launch agents and daemons are also shown in the system as lists. So here you can see one of these lists, which launches the Telegram app with the inject of a library. So if you follow the news, they recently published some vulnerabilities in the Telegram, which lets them go around the TCC mechanism. This way, in Telegram, they just inject. I mean, the downloadable Telegram, not from the store, they can inject libraries which are not signed, and this way, in the context of the Telegram process, you can obtain the credentials and authorizations. Like Telegram has access to the microphone, camera, and other things. How should you hunt for the launch agents and daemons in the system? You can split them into two big tracks. The first one is looking for anomalies related to the list files, so which show what the system should run and launch. And the second one So you should go inside the list files. You should be looking for anomalies in so-called targets of lists, the things which are launched. So you look for some suspicious launched files with the launch agents and daemons mechanisms. So let's start with the suspicious list files, those describing what should be launched in an automated fashion in the system.
What telemetry could be required, but from the process monitoring and process inventory, we can be helped by the file monitoring, because list file are files, and you have actually to put something into auto loading. You have to put that into the file folder. Another interesting way, you can use telemetry, which not always available. That's about the file inventory. So it means that you can just take stock of the catalog and take stock of the files which are there. For instance, launch agents and launch daemons inventory and launch items inventory. That's another option. And for instance, Ask Query contains tables that would help you to make an inventory of the daemons or agents, to take stock of them. And these are the techniques which are most widely used by the malicious criminals. One of such ways is the use of the QRL or another utility of the command line, so that the file would be uploaded from some store. These are different malicious software which are being used. So we look for the command lines that would have QRL or another script interpreter, which might be used in order to upload the data from internet, along with the parts of the path to the catalogs where placed files would be stored. Once we have a file monitoring, it means that we can monitor the file operations, setting up the files along with the placed agents and launch and daemon files, some script interpreters such as Microsoft Office and other utilities. Another way how placed may emerge in the system, that about building the placed file structure from the command line. For that you may use placed body. That's a utility from Macintosh, and you may add to placed file necessary elements, and mal users love that very much. And apart from that, there is also an echo, a console interpreter. So you may find an XML of placed file, and it would be added immediately to the daemon and agent file. It could be monitored very easily. We look at the command file, placed echo, then certain keys from placed files run in CloudWare program document, which are necessary to be, which are a must for the placed file, so that it could be launched automatically. So once you find it there, and that should sound an alarm. Then decoding the content from base 64. It looks very much like placed body, but actually it's been encoded in base 64, and it would be actually be decoded. And usually there would be a subline of base 64, the combination of base 64 substring and path to the launch agent or daemon's placed files location. That's an indication of the fact that something goes wrong with the system. There are other patterns how the criminals render the placed files to the necessary areas. They would actually do the copying or moving of the temp files. That was about the delivery, how a placed file emerges in the system. Once we are already in the system and we fail to detect the delivery moment, we have to understand whether there are malicious placed files in the system. So let's have a look at the name. On this slide you may find some patterns how the criminals try to hide the real names. First of all, please file should contain COM-APPLE as a pre-word, and actually such files should be part only of the launch systems, not of the user systems. So then hidden list names, name starts with dot, and it's enough in order to put dot in the very beginning, so it would look very suspiciously. Two short list file names, which would contain one or two symbols, and usually list files would look like a domain name in most cases. Very rarely list file actually would not coincide with the domain name. If you find a file which is called one.plist, so it means that this is very suspicious. Then we'll look in the user catalogs. List files which would have COM-APPLE or other patterns, which are not typical for the user launch daemons or launch agents. Then you search for list files with short names, and that would just one or two, three symbols long names, which is quite abnormal. Hidden list files that start with dot. That's quite regular. Now we spoke about the search for abnormal files, and now we're hunting for suspicious list files, actually, which should be automatically uploaded. In that sense, we need MosQuery, for instance, and MosQuery would have a table. We can tap it in order to find the path to the launch daemon and launch daemon, and we will also find the command line. And that's a window utility which has a console regimen, and for instance would help you to launch that from the console and to get the result of scanning. For instance, if you launch that at all the machines and to put that on the automatic loading, that's a good way to collect the necessary data from the infrastructure. This is applicable to Macintosh. The first abnormally launch agent or launch daemon is launching a hidden file which starts with dot, or a file from a hidden catalog. Sometimes it happens legitimately, but in most cases this looks very suspicious. The rule is quite simple. We search for hidden files or files from hidden folders as a launch agent or daemon targets. We look for the file names which start with dot. Then the launch from the temporary files. If launch agents are study files from temporal folders, this looks suspicious. etc, that's another indication, but again, as many reports show, that's a very common pattern. Next. Launch agent or launch daemon launch a certain script interpreter or shells. So it means that bash can be launched, sh can be launched, or for instance there might be just a path to bash script without the resulting to the script interpreter. And not necessarily you just put that as bash -c. Python also is being loved by bad guys. Then PostScript, that's the interpreter of Apple scripts. And another untypical way is about jar files, which have been Java files, which have been jar files, which have been prescribed as a launch agent. So the rule is very simple. We search for launch agents and launch daemons that would start the interpreter, so that would launch the scripts using the extension of the file. In most cases, that would be an abnormal pattern. No one does that legitimately. And finally, login items. That's another mechanism which is less popular than launch daemons or launch agents. You can find that in the system settings. Before Ventura, you have to start actually looking for the user files, and starting from Ventura, actually, you go downstream. So login items would have certain database, background of monitor activity, which would have its binary nature, but there are other systemic things which help you to add new elements. These IPs actually could be called for through scripts or directly. Also script. You can make a new login item there in the system, and that's a very abnormal thing. And correlation rule would also be quite simple. In a situation when the body of the script is rendered through an interpreter that's more sophisticated, that means that we don't see these typical commands, and telemetry doesn't help us to see the body of the script. But the generic approach would be like the following: if the file in background activity monitoring changes in the system, so it means that the paths were changed. So it means that either a new login item was installed or it was erased. It doesn't happen so often. And then we try to understand why a login item emerged or was erased, deleted from the system. And the generic approach, which would help you to detect the suspicious launch agents and launch daemons, is that actually you have to search for recently created non-signed files started by launch. Can be sign of newly created launch agent or launch daemon. If launch D signs some unsigned file, which life is too short, it should look suspiciously. This should sound an alarm. You can send that as a hunting request. Credential access. So what can we consider? We can look at keychains, the request for introducing a password and cookies, and stored passwords in the browser. The first technique is quite reliable and quite popular. So some fake window can be shown asking for typing in a password. And you can also actually make a legitimate icon, and the window would look like the user will never suspect anything. And this password now is available for the attackers. What the bad guys are doing, the bad guys getting that password. They may check whether it is correct or not correct, and actually if it is not correct, then this window would pop up once again. And once actually you push the cancel button, then again that window would pop up, and then the right password would be typed in. And this is how actual attackers would get passwords. That's a regular case when macOS user actually becomes an admin. You may use an OSA script in order to show that window fishing for a password. And this looks very suspicious. This should sound an alarm. How actually the malicious guys are checking whether the password is correct? This C or CDOS minus C is being used with certain sudo or DCL helps you to check the correctness of the password without setting up the password session. So very rarely it would be used legitimately. Whereas this CL with IOF only is a very non-typical situation. Metasploit, for instance, has a password pumped spoof module, which shows a window, but in that case, the body of the script would not be rendered as a body, but it would be actually dropped into the temp, to the catalog with a randomized name, and then using also script, it would launch that script, sending not the body of the script, but the path to the file in the temporary folder. So the detect is quite easy. We look at the runs of scripts from temporary folder, just an abnormally, which will help you to identify some suspicious scripts. This is what Maxim told us about. And the worst case scenario is about spoofing credentials dialog using API calls. So no suspicious files are going to create, and nothing would be in the command line. But what we do about that? Yet we do not know what to do about that. The body of PowerShell scripts could be somehow analyzed in order to identify such suspicious cases. Keychain, what is it? This is sancta sanctorum of our system. This is a set of interfaces and protocols which are being used by the users and by the application in order to store different secrets, keys, passwords, certificates, etc., etc., many other things. And it would be quite logical that for the criminals getting a keychain from the machine and to unlock that, that's a very good thing. You get the keychain file using zip, where utilize utility SCP, and then you open that, for instance. Either you brute that, but bruting actually is very ungrateful work. The cryptography there looks very solid, very reliable. Then you can use the security utility, which has been used in order to run keychains. That actually has a feature that could help you to dump keychains, so the attacker may use that. But then the user will just see the window more than once, and he would guess that security wants to get access to this or that, and please type in your password. That makes a lot of noise, but the users in Macintosh are used to type in passwords every now and then, because this is how the security system in the Macintosh is structured. So they have to prove everything with passwords. There is another technique. You can render the utility which the forensic guys are being using, and then using volatility you can get that from keychain, and also get the master key, which could be used in order to decipher the keychain. And that's an example of a utility which is being using the vulnerabilities which are no longer valid, where, for instance, copy and paste placed file actually might be used in order to replicate all the files within keychain. Grab keychain files. A typical pattern is that the command line would contain paths to the keychain. Usually, actually, it could be filtered very easily. These are the examples of malware, which is just zipping the user catalog, and the zip would get a path to the keychain. This pattern is quite regular, and this is something actually that should catch your eye. We look at your actually the keychain paths, or well-known keychain paths that would contain the path to that. Another story. Very often keychain has been copied from the user catalog to some temp. So the attacking malware would contain the data in order to zip it and to render that at once. So once actually you see that there are file names with keychain.sh, but this is not a regular path, so most likely the administrators are copying the files, or these are not the administrators. In most frequently, in most of the cases, these would be the malicious guys. I spoke about dumping of keychain content via security command. You will see such an window requesting password, and it would pop up more than once. As for detecting, we'll look at such keychain runs with such a request. Browser cookies and credentials theft. That's also quite attractive for the malicious guys. So browser cookies and passwords are highly valuable for attackers, and stolen cookies can be used to get access to something. So how this data could be stolen? There is a straightforward approach when the catalogs would be just copied, the ones which would contain the saved passwords. And these paths actually are very well known both for cookies and for the saved passwords. So what pattern we see there? The command line would contain a path to the file with the saved credentials or cookies, and the stealers like to do that very much for all kinds of operational systems. Windows, for instance, PowerShell, and in the command line of PowerShell you will see the path to the file with cookies, etc. So it could be detected easily. You search for path to the browser cookies storage in the command lines. On that slide you can see an example with the path to cookies for different browsers. And there are a lot of different browsers, including the Russian-made ones, and there are paths to the browser credential storage. So the slides are different just to see all the lines, all the pieces of code. Once we're speaking about the Chrome or Chromium base, it is not enough to copy the database with passwords. You have to decipher that. And the key actually would be stored in keychain. And there is a security utility which helps to get that master key from the keychain. That's a typical pattern which is being used by the criminals after they have copied the database of saved passwords. Then they would try to steal the master key. That's the hack browser data. That's a cross-platform utility after it has copied all the files, and it is copying without using CPMV utility. We'll not see that in the command line because there will be no such lines there leading to the private data. But at the end of the day, it would do what? It would launch the security with a command line which legitimately never is run. So we are looking for security tool usage to get browsers master key from users keychain. So I'm done with my presentation. As I said, we actually spoke about evasion and discovery, and this is only the first part of the slides, but the second part of the slides would be delivered at some other event. And we'll listen to other techniques. So we are running out of time, so we probably can get some questions. There's a question with reference to macOS. I cannot hear you. This is much better. If we assume that we have to make Drake and we have these rights, can we use the same vulnerabilities for iOS? Well, actually, we have not studied iOS, and Plists and launch agents and launch daemons are there in iOS, but we didn't do such research, so I will not comment on that. Well, differences might be dramatic because iOS applications have their own features, have their own peculiarities, and not everything we told you now could be applicable to iOS, so there will be some difference. Okay. But the same bundles are being used there, I mean, in iOS. Well, that's true. So there are similarities and differences as well. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. My question is as follows. How often are the attacks using the security utilities? They said that this is a PowerShell for Windows mixed with something else, and once it is being used for certain infrastructure, it would look suspiciously. There are lots of attacks using that utility, but for instance, certain developer is using Apple Scriptive in order to make automation scripts. Then how do we detect the attacks? Maxim? Well, one of the car codes in the presentation would bring you to Patrick Ward's report. This is one of the top researchers on macOS, and he has a whole white paper about why OS scripts being used. This is more bad than good. In a nutshell, usually the software developers and administrators have different mechanisms that would configure Macintosh parameters the better way, but bad guys are in front of iOS scripts because it can be done very clandestinely. But iOS scripts, certainly what might be used as a software, but it can be used by the administrators who believe that this is the most optimal way to do something. So it depends on the software, it depends on the people who administer that. Well, my question was more about the fact that, for instance, if your infrastructure uses Macintosh, then how do we filter the false data that we get from scripting? Well, we do not look at the runs of scripts, but we look at certain parameters in the command line. You cannot put that as an alert rule that our script is being launched. We can do profiling of the data, and actually then there would be runs from certain catalogs for administrators and for the software developers, but this is typical of the PowerShell from Windows. Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have the following question. This is not about the threats, but about how we collect that. You said that you are using iOS query and other tools, but how do you collect that automatically, real time? Not using certain third-party utilities, but using the system utilities. macOS is the heaviest thing, actually. You cannot out-of-box solutions there. But now, actually, nice JS files could be developed, but before that, only OS query agents could be used in order to do that. But how do you send that information? How do you transfer that? There is a remote PIS2 utility which can collect certain events and send that at once. But what about the out-of-box solution? Well, actually, you cannot do that overnight with a blink of an eye. And we collect our data using certain agents as OS query or some other agent. Thank you so much for your contribution. I have the following question. In a number of cases, you may use Touch ID. You can use Touch ID in order to type in the password. Can you avoid the interception of the password? What we told you in Touch ID, these are two things different. Touch ID will protect you against the access to the system, but a user which already had an access to the system now launched some malware, and this malware would be stealing the password, Touch ID would be of no help. For clarity, there are system windows would pop up in which would ask either Touch ID or password, and in that case, the criminal actually does not give you an option to choose the Touch ID, but actually requires a password. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We can discuss that offline. The conference also 3 T-shirts for interesting questions, Maxim. I suggest that you choose one, and I will select the second one. Well, Touch ID is my favorite question, and iOS script, so this is my favorite question. So Touch ID question and iOS script